Well, is faith the opposite of facts and evidence? That's the question on the table today. I'm Pastor Josh Barnes. This is Justin Barnes, and this is the show where we're unashamed to look at political, social, cultural, and even theological issues and take a look at them from a biblical worldview because Jesus really died on the cross, rose from the dead, and that proves that the Bible's true. And if the Bible is true, then you can't be right about issues if you disagree with the Bible about them. And today we're going to show you a video from Neil deGrasse Tyson where he claims that, to be a person of faith, that faith is the opposite of facts, which is just absolutely the definition that a lot of people have of faith, but is not the biblical definition of faith, and is a wrong definition of faith, a very narrow definition of faith. We're going to show you the video in just a second. Before we do, Justin, this is a topic I'm sure that you've considered before.
Yeah, and this is one that a lot of Christians don't help themselves out on because it is one where a lot of people will have the statement of, I don't need facts. I don't need any reasons for why I believe it. I have faith. So if I have faith, I don't need reasons. I don't need arguments. I don't need data or facts or anything like that. I think that's Christians shooting themselves in the foot. And it's people who really, I think, frankly, have been kind of lazy and just haven't put the work in to understand that there is a lot of data and reasons and facts and arguments and stuff like that. But regardless, those people don't get to define what the biblical usage of the idea of faith is. And I'm sure that's something we will get into today.
Absolutely. We definitely will be doing that. Let's go ahead and jump to the video. This is just a little clip that somebody sent me. It's looks like it had been cut and put on TikTok, but this is Neil deGrasse Tyson in his expert opinion. Here we go.
So these are people who are apparently require data to support their faith. I find that odd, right? Because then it's not faith, right? I mean, if you have religious faith, then whatever anyone says about the world wouldn't matter to you. If it does matter to you, then that's a different kind of contract that you're taking out on information. And that contract is, there could be data out there that would conflict with your religious philosophy, and then you'd have to go along with it. But that's not what actually happens. There's a pretense that data matters, and then they filter it, reinterpret it, ignore parts of it, slice and dice it so that it all fits in to the religious philosophy. So it requires blinders in order to make that happen.
Okay, so does faith in the Bible and in Christianity require blinders? I think the suggestion that he's making here, we don't see the whole clip here, but the suggestion that he's making in this clip is that not just that Christianity requires this, but that all faith, all religions require blinders to say it doesn't matter what evidence is presented, it only matters what I have chosen to believe. And that choosing to believe something comes first and evidence doesn't matter. Okay, Justin, is that even what faith actually is?
No. And in fact, it's kind of, the more I think about it, the more I don't understand this idea that faith is belief without evidence, because even if all we had was the Bible, let's say, like we didn't have historical data to bring into it, we didn't have the fact that the Bible is corroborated by tons of science and all of that sort of stuff. Even if we didn't have that, the Bible itself is a form of evidence. It is a witness, a passing on of a tale. Even if you don't believe it's true, it is some form of evidence. And that's what you're supposed to believe on the basis of. Now, you may say it's not good evidence, but it is evidence. The fact of the matter is, Paul didn't go up to people and say, believe in Jesus. He went up to them and said, Jesus was a man born to a virgin who died on the cross, and, all of this stuff, and here's where the Old Testament ties in, and you should believe. What was he doing? He wasn't saying, believe on nothing, just take it by this common idea of faith, but rather, here is the evidence, believe. So faith in the Bible, I don't get the idea that faith ever is used in the idea of belief without evidence. It's belief based on the abundant evidence that God gave. And really what it comes down to is submission of one's mind to the parts where we're never going to have all the answers, recognizing that and saying, because of the evidence God has given me and his command to repent and believe, I will have faith. That is the biblical usage of faith. And by the way, I have plenty of text to go to here, but I'm going to let you get back in first.
Yeah, let me jump in real quick first, because there is a lot to say on this, and we could talk about all the evidence we have, sort of compile some of the main categories of evidence. There's so much in every category, but we could talk about some of the different categories. But it is a fundamental, and for someone who presents himself as a very intelligent person like Neil deGrasse Tyson. Whether he really is, I don't know if I want to comment on that. I'm just saying he presents himself as a very intelligent person. But yet he seems to misunderstand the basic idea about faith. When someone says, I believe something, the natural question that most people ask, if they don't also believe that thing, is why do you believe that? The reason that that's a natural question, if you don't also believe the thing, is because you don't know the evidence that they're believing in. And you're assuming that they have evidence that they're believing in, right? Now, Neil deGrasse Tyson can argue that, like you said, that Christianity doesn't have good evidence and that other religions don't have good evidence. But nobody believes anything for no reason, right? The worst reason to believe something is just because you want to believe something, right? That is the worst reason, but it's still a reason, right? Because it's not an evidence-based reason. But almost every other reason that anyone ever produces for believing is actual evidence. For instance, when I was a little kid, I was 4 years old, I came to faith in Christ. At the time, the only evidence I had was that I knew my dad. I knew that he knew a lot more than me, and he told me Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead. And I said, that sounds like good evidence. That sounds like a credible witness who's telling me that this is true. I believe that, right? That is evidence. Now, I was able to dive deeper into that and to learn more about the evidence beyond just the testimony of my dad as I grew. But everybody believes stuff for reasons. Like, they have some evidence for it. So the idea that there's any kind of faith, even Muslims are going to say, well, no, we have evidence because we have the Quran. Now, the Quran, I think, is very bad evidence, and we can talk a lot about that. But they're going to say they have evidence. So what he's trying to do is say that, bad evidence equals you don't have evidence at all. No, that's not what we're talking about. He's changing the definition of words in order to try to make anyone who has faith look like an idiot.
Yeah, and I want to go to one text here to sort of let's make sure that we're showing that this is not something we're making up. We're not trying to plaster over, oh, well, the Bible really is about blind evidence, but we want to make it look smart, so we're going to say it is about evidence. No. Let's go to a text, and it's a text that if you watch the show, you've seen it dozens of times, especially just recently with Easter. But 1 Corinthians 15, we have Paul's presentation of what he calls the gospel. This is the thing you are to have faith in. It is the gospel. It is what saves you. It is where our faith lies. Paul says, moreover, I declare to you the gospel which I preached unto you, which also ye have believed, and wherein ye stand, by which also ye are saved, if ye keep in memory what I preached unto you, unless ye had believed in vain. Believed, faith, that's what we're talking about here, right? Okay, so what's this gospel, Paul? For I delivered unto you, first of all, that which I also received. Okay, so Paul's saying it wasn't originated with him. There's another source involved. That's one piece of evidence. How that Christ died for our sins, according to the Scriptures. There's another piece of evidence. It was prophesied. It was according to the Scriptures. You can point to a piece of evidence that corroborates this. And that he was buried, and he rose again the third day, according to the Scriptures. Again, another piece of evidence. And that he was seen of Cephas, another piece of evidence. Then of the 12, another piece of evidence. After that he was seen of above 500 brethren at once, another piece of evidence. Of whom the greater part remain unto this present, but some are fallen asleep. After that, he was seen of James, another piece of evidence. Then of all the apostles, another piece of evidence. And last of all, he was seen of me as one born out of due time, another piece of evidence. So Paul, in his presentation of here's what the gospel is, built into that, what he's saying you need to believe, he gives evidence after evidence after evidence after evidence that they can go check. Go read the scriptures. Did it prophesy this? Yes, Psalm 22. Yes, Isaiah 53. It did prophesy this. Go ask the witnesses. Did they see the resurrected Christ? Yes, they did. So Paul did not expect the Corinthians to believe the gospel based on just believe it. He said, here's the evidence. And most importantly, where he starts is here's what God said. Go look at that. Go look at the other evidence. And then says, believe it. Yeah. So no, biblically, we're talking about faith is inherently based on evidence. But it's based on the evidence that God gave us. And we have to recognize we're not going to be able to answer every question. There comes a point where you have to say, it's not about evidence. It's just I need to submit to God. Because he gave me plenty of evidence, I believe.
Okay, so here's what I want to do. And that's excellent, by the way. What I want to do is I want to go through and we're going to play the video again with our shots up on the screen so that way we can pause and comment as he's making each point. And then after that, we're going to present sort of the categories of evidence and represent in a very brief fashion the massive amounts of evidence that exist for the truth
you're betting on us
of our faith.
Showing a lot of restraint.
a lot of restraint, yes.
Thinking we'll have all that time.
All right, here we go. Here is, one more time, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
So these are people who are apparently require data to support their faith.
Now think of, yes, we do require data to support our faith. It is only a very small minority and actually very ignorant people who would say, no, I don't need any data. I believe this because I want to believe it without any reason other than my desire to believe something, right? That is an incredibly small minority of people. And even if the size of it doesn't really matter, that is an incredibly ignorant group of people who believe something just because they want to, right? He's categorizing all religions in that group, and that's nonsense. Plus, I mean, you just think about the word believe when you're talking to a jury. What do? They go into the deliberation room, whatever that is, and they sit around a table or whatever, and they all vote on what they believe to be true about the trial. But that faith is they shouldn't require data for that. Of course they require data. And if they don't know what to believe, they go back and examine the evidence again until they're sure, and they can say, we believe this person is guilty, or we believe that they're innocent. That's what the word believe means. That's the main use of the word. It's a very small definition that Neil deGrasse Tyson is using here and trying to apply it to all believers.
And don't let him get away with this, by the way. He has faith too. He does.
Right.
Everyone who has a worldview, so everyone, has faith at some point down that worldview. You might say, oh, but he's all about science. It is not science to say everything came from nothing. That is a statement you must take on faith. You have to. You cannot demonstrate it scientifically, and even if you could, which you can't, but even if you could, you would have to then trust that science is reliable, which I'm not suggesting it's not, but you'd have to trust that it is, that the sources, that the methodology was all reliable. Whatever it is, you have to have faith at some point. The question is, what do you have faith in? Do you have faith in nothing becoming something? Because we know matter is not eternal. It can't be. Infinity is not a real number. Nothing becoming something, non-living matter becoming living matter when not acted upon by already living matter. That's a key distinction. There's no evidence for any of this. This is something he has to accept by faith. He cannot prove it. So
yeah, and
don't let him get away with it.
The other interesting thing too that you touched on there, when evidence does come out, when data does come out that suggests, for instance, that all all human beings descended from one common ancestor, and more information comes out that makes evolution, at least without any input from God, just completely impossible. As more evidence has come out for Darwinism, against Darwinism, what has Neil deGrasse Tyson said? No, because I've already decided what I want to believe. Who's the one ignoring data in order to support their belief? Yeah.
I find that odd.
Get away with it.
Right? Because then it's not faith, right? I mean, if you have religious faith, then whatever anyone says about the world wouldn't matter to you. If it does matter to you, then that's a different kind of contract that you're taking out on information.
Now, whatever anyone says about the world doesn't really matter. No. I mean, what we're looking at is evidence and data, not just what people claim, not just claims, right?
And by the way, the contract we have here is with truth. And eventually, if you truly do care about truth, you come to the realization that you are to submit to the one who is truth. I'm not afraid of data and evidence and facts that are properly arrived at and things of that nature, because I serve the one who is truth. This is why we can do apologetics, is because the Bible has stood the test of time for thousands of years. It wouldn't have done that if it was this whatever contract with truth this man's suggesting. Some of the brightest people in all of history have been Christians, whether we're talking philosophy or science or whatever field you want to name. How do you think they got there? This man is standing on the shoulders of a lot of Christians to try to make this accusation. But I digress.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And that contract is, there could be data out there that would conflict with your religious philosophy, and then you'd have to go along with it.
So here's a question that atheists like to ask Christians: do you admit that there could be data out there that conflicts with your religious philosophy? And if it were found, would you abandon your religious philosophy? Justin, I'm going to ask you that question.
So there's several ways to answer this. The way I'd probably answer that question if someone asked me right now is I would say no, because it is impossible. Because you can't even have, for example, intelligibility. The preconditions of intelligibility are met if there is no God. There's no such thing as an uncaused cause if you don't have a God. There's no such thing as morality, which everyone knows exists if there's not a God. There's too many things that it's not that there is no hypothetical you could invent where there's evidence now that God doesn't exist, but I am confident there is no such thing as evidence that God doesn't exist. So it's weird. You have to think categorically, but I'm saying in real life, there is no such thing as evidence that God doesn't exist. So no, there couldn't be, because there is none.
It would be similar to someone saying, you believe that you're not in the Matrix, but what if evidence came out to say that you are in the Matrix? Or you believe that, and that's not even a good thing, a very fair one, because that one actually is a bit more believable than God, because we wouldn't know, right, if we were in the Matrix. But let's say this: someone comes to me and says, "Are you willing to admit that there is a possible that there could possibly come forth evidence that proves that your wife does not exist?" I would say, I mean, I'm listening to evidence, sure, but that's not going to happen. I've met my wife. I've seen her. I have children by her. My wife exists, period. End of conversation. There's too much evidence to deny this. You don't just live your life assuming that everything that is well proven and obviously true could possibly be proven wrong. No, it can't be. God is even more evidential than my wife, because he hasn't just produced 4 children, okay? Right? He's done a whole lot more than she has, and all of it points back to him. And we're going to actually talk about that. Actually, let's go ahead and since we've got only a few minutes left.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
Key thing here, though, is that every argument that they're going to say, okay, well, here's the evidence then, is going to be an argument that will fundamentally rely on God to produce. For example, well, your God was God did all this evil stuff in the Old Testament. Well, now you're relying on morality. You can't have that unless you have God. Well, but this science, really? Because now you're relying on induction, which you can't have unless you have a governor of the universe named God. What about all this material stuff? Well, what about the immaterial stuff, which you can't account for unless you have God? Every argument they're going to bring is relying on God to attack the idea of God. You
Yeah.
can't have any of it if you don't have God as the foundation. So no, that's why I say there really isn't, because every argument you will bring will depend on God existing in order to try to attack the idea of God existing.
Yeah. Well, and that segues into what I call the three categories of arguments for the truth of the Bible and Christianity. And I would say that they are arguments from philosophy, arguments from prophecy, and arguments from history. And a lot of there's a lot of overlap in there. But when you talk about the philosophical arguments, there's and you just mentioned probably the most powerful one. It's the presuppositional argument. It's the fact that no, morality doesn't have a grounding, logic doesn't have a grounding. None of these things have grounding without a supreme being grounding them all. And one of the great arguments that sort of puts all that together is the argument on conditions. If things are conditional, that means they have to have been created by something. If things are necessary, then they don't have to be created. So the idea is there are very few things in the universe that are necessary things that could not possibly not exist. You look outside, you look at a tree, you look at a stump, you look at a dog, you look at a bee. All those things could possibly not exist. They had to be brought into existence by something else. Even the universe, we know, had to be brought into existence. We know this from science. So that means there has to be something beyond time, beyond space, beyond the universe that brought into existence that is necessary, that couldn't not exist. Kind of like numbers. We have words for numbers. There's two of us here. The fact that there are two of us is not a necessary thing, but the number two, the word for the number two is just an English word that we created, but the number seems to be like a necessary thing. It just sort of exists in reality. And the same thing, God there would have to be a necessary being, God, who would have to bring everything into existence. There's no other reason for logic to exist. There's no other reason for anything else to exist at all unless there's a necessary being. And so you could get really deep or you could go surface level, but there are a bazillion different arguments from philosophy. If you're a philosopher, it's really hard to get around the very obvious truth that God exists. But then there's prophecy too. But I don't want to move on from that, Justin, before you have a chance to weigh in on that.
Well, no, I mean, the danger is always, as Paul said, that knowledge puffs up. And the danger always becomes that people think they can get so smart that they can get themselves separated from God. So philosophers for thousands of years now have been trying to get away from God. I mean, even go back to like Socrates and Plato. I mean, obviously writing. With arguments about, is it pious because it pleases the God, or does it please the God because it's pious? Trying to attack this idea, philosophers have always tried to get away from it. But the problem is, a well-ordered philosophy is actually in line with Scripture and subservient to Scripture. But even in this realm that people appeal to try to get away from God, done carefully and appropriately, even philosophy demonstrates, because everything in the universe done appropriately and carefully in accordance with how the universe is guided will result in coming to God. I say that about science, I say that about history, I say that about philosophy. It's inescapable. He is a necessary truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then the other thing too, the prophecies of the Old Testament. I mean, there's Ezekiel prophesies about the destruction of Tyre in such a specific way. Just hundreds of years before it takes place, before it finally is finished. And it happens exactly the way he prophesied. And it's not just Ezekiel. Over and over, Daniel makes prophecies so specific that just there's no way. And he counts out the exact number of years from Nehemiah's time until Jesus would come. I mean, it is absolutely incredibly amazing, the prophecies that are given. It's proven that they were given hundreds of years before they took place, and historically we know with absolute certainty that they did take place exactly the way they were prophesied. That means this is a book that's not like any other book. You don't have these kind of things, proven prophecies, in any other religious book. This means not only is there a God, but the God of the Bible is the God, is the true God. And then there's also history, and that really gets into the proof of the resurrection.
Well, and not only that, but for example, Psalm 22, you have hundreds of years before crucifixion existed, and especially Roman crucifixion existed.
Yeah.
Vivid description of the crucifixion of Christ. And not only that, but then, just in case you missed it, on the cross, Jesus quotes that psalm so that you know he's fulfilling it. He says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Which is the opening line to Psalm 22, as if he was saying, hey guys, in case you missed what was going on here, go read that psalm. This is it.
Yeah.
1,000 years before it happened.
We might have to do a whole series sometime on the evidence in prophecy, the evidence for the Bible. I mean, it would take us forever to get through because there is so much evidence, so much. But that's about all the time we have. The point is here, though, don't let, no matter how much evidence you've been acquainted with for Christianity, you shouldn't believe Christianity just because you want it to be true. Nobody really does if it's real Christianity, because real Christianity isn't something that we tend to want to be true. We don't want to think that we're guilty before God and we're condemned and that we need salvation. So real Christianity isn't something that most people want anyway. But if you believe in Christianity, found it on evidence and trust that there is evidence and go out there and find it. But don't let Neil deGrasse Tyson talk you out of Christianity just because he says, oh, it's not smart.
And don't let him get away with the idea that he's not also acting upon faith because he can't explain everything either.
Yeah. So, and this really goes for a lot. I'm sure there's college students who will come across this video. They're dealing with these kinds of professors in the classroom, and you know what? Don't let that. Don't think that you have no evidence behind your faith. Go out and study, learn the evidence, absolutely, but you don't have to know all of the evidence to know that you're not just believing because you want to. You actually have reasons, and reasonable faith is what God calls us to. Hebrews chapter 11 talks about reasonable, evidenced faith. That's all the time we have for today. We'll see you next time on Point of View.
White Mountain Munchies, the perfect snack food packed with plenty of vitamins and nutrients to satisfy your hunger, boost your immune system, and contribute to better overall health and wellness. Available in 4 fantastic flavors of Trail Mix, Maggie's Maple Madness, Hannah's Heavenly Harvest, Grayson's Getaway Goodies, and Jacoby's Jolly Jumble. Get yours now at whitemountainmunchies.com. White Mountain Munchies, non-GMO when you're on the go.